Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Wharton San Francisco campus. My name is Bernadette Burt, and I'm the COO, and I'm the Executive Director for the MBA program for executives out here in San Francisco. This has been the home for the Wharton San Francisco campus for 10 years now. We've just celebrated our 10th anniversary out here, so we're happy to have all of you joining us this evening for another one of our great women's events that we've been hosting. In this space for the past 10 years, we've been really enjoying the company of our faculty and the students of the MBA program for executives. We are graduating our 10th class in the spring of this year. It will be our 36th class for MBA for execs. We've got a few of our current students here as well. And in the room this evening, we have some current students. We have alumni from the MBA program for execs out here, and from the East Coast as well, and I know we have some Wharton alums from the undergraduate program as well. So welcome to all of you, and we're really happy to have you joining us this evening. One of the keys of this program for the MBA for executives is the fact that it is the same program that runs on the East Coast for full-time students, for MBA for exec students on the East Coast, and for students on the West Coast as well. So it is a full 2-year MBA program, all the coursework, all the content, a lot of hard work that goes with all of that as well. And we look at our students and the fact that they're mid-career, they're managing families, and they're managing amazing jobs, and sometimes family, and a lot of travel as well. And so our hats off to all the hard work that they are doing and the accomplishments that they're making during their 2 years with us as well. In addition to that, it is about the faculty who come out and join us. So for the past 10 years, the same faculty who are teaching in the full-time program and on the East Coast MBA for Executives program fly out here every other weekend to teach in these programs as well, so that our students have the same rigorous, amazing experience. So one MBA in 2 locations. So that's all I'll say about the program itself. I could talk about it all evening, but that's really not the main reason why we're here. This evening is really about women in the workforce, and hearing from Connie Duckworth, who is a Wharton alumnus and who has had an amazing career and is willing to share a little bit of her time with us to talk about what that career has looked like. Thank you all for joining us. Connie is going to share a little bit about her story of success in business, managing career goals in a man's world, giving back to others, and mentoring women around the world. After graduating with her MBA from Wharton, Connie's career in banking grew quickly, and in just a few short years, she was named the first woman sales and training partner in the history of Goldman Sachs and Company. After a 20-year career, Connie retired from Goldman Sachs in 2001 as a partner and managing director, the first in their history. And I'm hoping she'll speak a little bit about her entrepreneurial influence at Goldman before she left there as well. Connie's interests and expertise have also helped her support many organizations, both corporate and philanthropic, through her role on different boards over the past few years as well. And after leaving Goldman Sachs, Connie's interest in social entrepreneurship led her to founding Arzu, Inc. in 2004. And Arzu is a nonprofit organization where she currently serves as the pro bono chairman and chief executive officer. And much of what she'll be telling us about this evening is both her career at Goldman and while she's been the CEO for Arzu as well. Arzu Studio Hope supports the reconstruction of Afghanistan by empowering women, their families, and their communities. Income generation opportunities support sustainable economic development, instill personal worth, and build gender equality. With all of that said, I'd like to turn it over now to Connie to share her experiences with you. So help me welcome Connie this evening. Thank you. Just give me a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you, Bertie, very much. It really is a pleasure and a privilege to be in a room with so many dynamic women. I personally have always, and maybe it's because over the course of my career there have been so many times where I've been the only one in the room, that it's always tremendously energizing to be in a room with so many talented women. Can I just have a show of hands? I'm curious, how many of you are in the program here, the Executive MBA program at this time? And how many alums are there? And then just Wharton alums? And prospective students? Great. And then just others? Well, thank you. Well, this is a great, I'm even more impressed then. But I guess just in many ways, my career, and I will disclose, unfortunately, the year that I finished Wharton. I was at Wharton from 77 to 79. And I'd like to say I started as a child prodigy, but that's not 100% true. But there certainly wasn't the work requirement back then that there is now. But when I went to Wharton, I don't know how many women were there, but there were classes definitely where I was the only woman in that particular class. When I was looking for full-time work, I grew up in Texas, so when I looked there, I was still interviewing and being told at different places, well, we don't hire women, or we don't hire women in this particular group. And you know, the thing that'll make you laugh is I didn't think that was particularly odd to be told that. Now nobody would tell you that. So times have changed dramatically, but in many ways I feel like I've had the benefit of sort of being in maybe the forward group of women coming through the pipeline. And as a result, I've had a number of really interesting experiences. And I've also, I think, had the benefit of really learning from those experiences. And so I think as a whole, what Wharton empowered me to do was, number one, get a job, a real job, because my first job out of undergraduate school, and I graduated Phi Beta Kappa and with a 4.0. I was a secretary because that was the job I could get, because then there were 3 jobs that you could have. You could be a secretary, you could be a nurse, or you could be a teacher, or if you were really adventurous, you could be an airline stewardess. And so, so I was a secretary. And that, what I'm saying is, it is not atypical when I get in cohorts with women like me, and we have very similar and shared experiences. So Wharton really enabled me, gave me the toolkit to start on a business career, which I have truly loved, and it has enabled me to almost have a lifelong MBA in so many ways, because with this basic toolkit, I've been able to apply it to a number of different kinds of situations. Each one has been a personal learning experience for me. So I spent 20 years, as Bernie said, in the bond department at Goldman Sachs, and then retired. Along the way, I have 4 children, and who are now a senior and a sophomore down in LA at Claremont College. And then I have 2 in high school, senior and a sophomore in high school. So my children go boy, girl, boy, girl. They're all even birth years. And that may sound like that was planned, but I can assure you it was a completely random walk. So I was just extraordinarily lucky. Now, how many moms do we have in the audience now? Okay. Well, I can just say, and I am sure you all share this point of view, now that I'm on the other end of my career, and you all are smack in the middle, with all of the hectic aspects that that brings about, I can truly say my kids are the best thing I've ever done, without question. And so I just encourage you, if you do have children, especially little children, enjoy them, because their day will come. As I told Bernie earlier, when my older daughter, who's now kind of back from Mars, they sort of get taken away by the Martians at a certain age, and then a clone is left in their place, and then they eventually return to you. But I remember the day so clearly when she was in 7th grade, and I dropped her at school, and she looked at me with no other forewarning and said, I just want you to know, you are the most embarrassing mother in the parking lot. And what do you say to that? But truly, they've been terrific. And they are terrific. Although I do have a 15-year-old, the youngest of who's 15 going on 25, so She's my current challenge. So I did Goldman, and I loved that job. I love the aspect of being able to be measured on a quantitative basis with great regularity, because I knew pretty much at the end of every day what kind of P&L I had for the firm that day. And it actually, in some ways, was a simplifying process, because you could, basically, get beat up a little bit, but at the end of the day, you could have a very successful career. So I thought it was a great place for women at the time, and still do. But when I knew I was transitioning out after 20 years, I felt I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know what that something different was. But I knew I wanted to do something in business. So I had about 2 years of transition activities. My last couple of years at Goldman was in the late 90s, when the internet and sort of pre-.com bust. There were a lot of creative things going on, and I was running a sort of an old line business that was not particularly profitable, and was able to figure out an idea for an electronic trading platform. And I had no idea what I was doing. Nobody knew what was going on with these kinds of systems. But I convinced the firm to give me a couple of $1 million, and I went back to my office with a managing director who worked for me, my assistant, and 2 analysts, and we started a company. And after 2 years, we were able to sell pieces. It was a B2B company, trading a vehicle for the street in a very obscure part of the market. And we were able to sell it at about $100 million valuation, sell equity stakes to our competitors, which these competitors had never worked in this particular arena together. And when it got to the point where we were able to kick it out of the firm because it could stand alone, I retired. But I had really been bitten by the entrepreneurial bug, and then MD that worked for me left and became president of the company, and it, became a real company with a couple hundred people and had a liquidity event. So it was really a fun learning experience, but we really had no clue what we were doing. We just started doing it. So that was fun. And so when I transitioned, I spent a couple of years basically doing some very minor angel investing, but my screen was women-led businesses. And I invested with a group of women in Boston. And everyone has to pick a reason of why you select companies. Well, that was our reason. And we did a lot of mentoring and coaching of women entrepreneurs, and found that if you hadn't started a company before, there were some very basic questions that we were repeatedly asked. And the women entrepreneurs were so eager for advice and mentoring and counseling that several of us got together and we co-authored a book, which is just a basic primer on entrepreneurship to help answer some of those questions. And so I had a portfolio at one time of about 20 companies, and I called them my portfolio of early stage, high risk, women-led investments. And my husband called them my women's charities. And we were both kind of right, because I did write off a lot of them. But it was a great learning experience for me. And I do have one winner, which was Zipcar. So that was founded by a woman, believe it or not. So, of course, why didn't I invest more in Zipcar and less in the rest of them? Who knows? So after I did that, I then got involved in Afghanistan. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about, because after a couple of years of decompressing, I was ready to do something different. And at that moment in time, I got a call from a friend who was living in Washington, and she and I know each other from a women's business network called the Committee of 200, which are sort of the senior women corporate executives and entrepreneurs who have founded significant businesses, significant profitable businesses. And she called me and said, "Oh, I put your name in for something, you might get a call." And the something was shortly after the fall of the Taliban in early 2002, the State Department was putting together a bipartisan commission, a public-private partnership, never been done in this format before, to try to make sure that women had a seat at the table in New Afghanistan. And this entity is called the U.S. Afghan Women's Council. And they needed a business representative. So this friend said, oh, call Connie Duckworth. She just retired. She's really into these women's things. And she has plenty of time. So I got this call and was actually quite thrilled because I had been following Taliban abuse of women. Women's rights and women's economic empowerment has always been, throughout my career, my personal soapbox. And so I thought, great. I didn't have any idea what this thing would do or what it would lead to. And so what it has taken me on is a very strange, a long journey, much longer than I had ever anticipated because, once again, I really didn't know what I was getting into. And so one of the pieces of advice I have is it is important to take risk. I always have evaluated my career changes and decisions, even when I was at Goldman Sachs. Well, I can take this risk and try something new, or I can flip burgers at McDonald's. And so I can always support myself and my children one way or the other, so I might as well take the risk. And it's tended to work out. Well, so going to Afghanistan was sort of the same kind of thing. I went for the first time with a very small group in January of 2003. There were maybe 3 or 4 civilians and 3 or 4 people from the State Department, and I was the business representative. Well, in our own ways, each of us came back and have done something related to Afghanistan. That's what got me there. So I just wanted to give you that as background. But the neat thing is that the U.S. Afghan Women's Council was bipartisan from day one. It's still bipartisan. Laura Bush was the honorary chair during the Bush administration. It's permanently housed at Georgetown University, and Hillary Clinton is the honorary chair. And they both come to the meetings. And so it's now has 60 or 70 people. Lots of businesses, lots of business representatives, lots of people in education and healthcare. So that's just been another network that I had no idea I would have entree to that has been quite fascinating. So I want to tell you a little bit about what I actually do. So Arzu means hope in Dari, which is one of the major languages. And my goal was to find a way back in 2003 to employ women. Now, that was a big challenge because the country was completely devastated. And I initially thought garment industry, often first entrant into a low-cost labor market, picked up the phone, called some, through my network, called people I knew in the retailing and manufacturing trades. And they said, well, gee, is there a factory there? Well, no. We'd have to build one. Well, do they have electricity? Well, no. What about commercial shipping? Well, no. It's a landlocked country, and there isn't any commercial shipping. Security? Well, a little dicey. And at the time we started, for me, this was the most relevant point. There was no central bank. So how do you pay people if you can't wire transfer money into the country? We figured it out, but it was a challenge. So we backed into rugs. I was product agnostic. I wanted something that would create a lot of jobs. And rug making is a traditional artisan skill, high-level artisan skill for 1,000 years. And women can do it in their homes. Now that presents, from a business perspective, a manufacturing challenge because you have distributed manufacturing, and so quality control, big issue. Backed into rugs, and I incorporated as a 501c3 Illinois, I live in Chicago, Illinois nonprofit, and started. Now at that time I basically knew nothing about Afghanistan, nothing about rugs, and nothing about international development. But I figured, and now when I think back on it, I think, boy, it was really lucky I didn't know anything about any of those things, because I don't know that I would have actually ended up where I am if I hadn't started down the journey. So what we do, we have 2 now, what I call flagship export products. The first is very high-end, authentically created, traditionally created rugs that are fair labor, fair trade. And we work in 11 villages in rural Afghanistan, primarily in the center part, which is the Hazarajat. How many people read The Kite Runner years ago? The servant family were Hazara. So that has always been sort of the low caste, if you will, in Afghanistan. And they're pretty isolated. And they have turned out, that area has turned out to be where we innovate everything because they are so receptive to new ideas and change. We also work in a much more religiously conservative area with 3 other ethnic groups up in the northern part of Afghanistan. So rugs it was. I went to Afghanistan the first trip, brought back some samples, got connected with some rug experts, and I would call people up that wrote books about Oriental rugs and explain what I was trying to do and ask if they would help. And I don't think surprisingly, actually, everyone I've called has pretty much offered to help. So I remember going and meeting this man and throwing my sample down and expecting him to get down on the floor and feel it and turn it over and look at it. And he sat down, we started talking. I said, well, don't you want to look at the rug? He said, it's junk. I don't have to look at it. I said, what do you mean junk? Well, that was our starting point because the rug industry had become extremely discombobulated. The supply chain was disrupted. The weavers were in refugee camps. The sheep were skinny. The wool wasn't good, and so forth. So it took about 3+ years to reconstruct a supply chain, and bit by bit, baby step, inch by inch, create a core team of people that were all Afghan. And this is the part where I didn't know anything about international development. One of the sort of just natural reactions I had was we need to use an all Afghan staff there on the ground, because this isn't about us. This is about training Afghans to run something, to run a business. And so that is very different than the way international development is done globally. It tends to be done by expats from developed countries, whether Europe, US, and it's a very top-down kind of process. And what happens in these countries when the fire hose of international development money comes pouring in, whether from governments or large organizations, it completely skews the labor market. Anyone with education who speaks other languages of developed countries can command typically 10 times the market rate for their labor. So, and that means that anybody that is educated, highly educated, is working in menial positions like driver or translator for big international organizations because they have to be able to speak the language of that organization. So there's this brain tilt that goes on. So instead of rebuilding their countries, they're driving people around. And I've seen this same phenomena in Cuba, believe it or not, where it's been, there's an example of a failed economic system that has the same quality of brain drain. So we said, oh, we're going to do an all local staff. And it's a gender segregated country, so we've had to have certain management positions to manage of the same country director, man, country director, woman. And they do different things, and our staff interacts collaboratively, but in society, men talk to men and women talk to women. So anyway, this is what we call a rug journey. And on the left there is an actual graph that has been hand painted. That's actually a male job in Afghanistan, hand painting the graphs. And it's a dying art. So we have a master grapher who's in his 70s, who's had a stroke, who's training a cadre of apprentices to carry on this skill. We are about sustainability in its broadest sense: economic, cultural, and environmental. This is what they're working on, this rug, which was actually designed by a young architect in a competition. We have, so again, think the first 3 years, it was a lot of blocking and tackling and getting a lot of really bad looking rugs. But now we have 3 major collections. The modern collection, there's an example, the traditional collection, and the tribal collection. And I'll pause on this because you'll notice at the bottom we name all of the rugs. We have a team now of 10 paid employees, all women, in the United States, and a staff of about 55 in Afghanistan. And that's everyone from the country directors to teachers to health workers to rug inspectors to drivers, etc. And we have created, from a starting point of about 30 women, displaced persons, we now are in 11 villages and have created about 1,300 jobs. And we are considered probably, if not the, one of the largest private employers of women in Afghanistan. Now, that's a fairly pathetic statement because it's only 1,300 jobs. But the ripple effect of empowering women in rural areas where there is no opportunity for men or women, there's an enormous ripple effect. And so Arzu's programs, whether they're the economic programs or the social programs that we link very much to the income, or the community development programs for people who cannot weave, probably impact tens of thousands of people now in Afghanistan. But this rug is actually, we call it hope because Arzu means hope. There's a real name for this rug. It's called the Pashirik, and it is a copy of the oldest rug ever found in the world. The original was found in a tomb in Central Asia and is on display in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. And so it may be hard to see, but there are horsemen going around this rug. The original's carbon dated to 500 BC. So the horsemen have been going around this rug for like 2,500 years, and it's my personal favorite, and so it's kind of our signature piece. Now, I point this out because, again, from the starting word junk, it took quite a lot to get our supply chain retooled, and get local staff trained. But now we actually have won a number of, we started in sort of 2008, 2009, really getting some spectacular rugs, so that we've won a number of design industry awards. And this year, the two that we won were the first that is from the ASID, the American Society of Interior Design. Now remember, I was a dual finance and accounting major at Wharton, and so this is all new learning experience for me. But they gave us the inaugural award for the company. Now we're a nonprofit social business, for the company changing the environment for humanity through design-related activities. So we're very thrilled when we get this kind of thing. We also, interestingly, because we're also about innovation, whether it's product innovation, social engineering innovation, innovation inside households and in the lives of women. We won a gold medal Edison Award this year in the category, the consumer category of lifestyle and social impact. Now, just to compare, the iPad won in its category. So there's iPad and there's Arzu rugs, okay? So you know that. So anyway, so innovation. Now, there's a deal that we started at, and we just made this up. We had no idea what we were doing. It just seemed to make sense that you can't just pick one thing when you're dealing with real poverty. You can't just pick education or just pick health or just pick jobs. You really have to think holistically. And so I really think about sort of the Millennium Development Goal kind of framework, where you have to address all angles of poverty to have impact. And we're doing this at the very, very grassroots level. So we have a social contract that we actually have the male head of household of our weaving families when we first register a family in our program, thumbprint. And the contract is we will give them significantly higher wages in the form of an ongoing salary. We provide all materials rather than the woman personally having to go into debt to purchase materials. And then we give a 50% quality incentive bonus. We don't want them to weave fast, we want them to weave really well. And so this puts them at an entirely different income bracket. Okay, so the deal is, if you want the extra money, the family has to agree that to release the women to us for 2 hours a day, 6 days a week for literacy classes. So our original weavers are in sort of 5th grade, and they're typically maybe the only literate person in their adult in their household. We also require the families to agree that the children, girls and boys, must be enrolled in school. And in the early days, when the government schools were just reopening, there was this missing generation because the schools reopened for people in 1st grade. But if a girl was now 10 or 12, she wasn't allowed to go to the school. So we created fast-track classes to get her mainstreamed into school. So we've actually had girls who've graduated from college, or from high school, and some that have graduated with advanced degrees. But we didn't want to just leave it with the family. We wanted to think about how we could benefit the broader community. So we started to experiment a couple of years ago with what I would call developing mic testing, piloting. Everything's a pilot. That way you're never disappointed when it doesn't work. And actually nothing works the first time. That's another truism. But we started to experiment with training women to produce products for local market consumption. So what these women are doing is actually, that's not oatmeal, that's shredded paper that they are making, and it's all low tech. One of our rules is nothing can plug in because there's no electricity. So they're hand pressing these briquettes, which are like fake fireplace logs, because this is a country that is deforested. And so they live, think Colorado temperatures, it's mountainous and snowed in the winter. So the first test group of a dozen or so women 2 years ago made 75,000 of these during the warm season. So we quadrupled the program and we made 400,000. And these are being sold to they heat the Arzu buildings, plus they're being sold to the local government offices. Now this is one of our villages. This shush pool is, and you'll see that housing is a real issue. If you look at, if you read about Maslow's pyramid of need, the first order needs are for food, water, and relatively constant temperature. What that means is clothing and housing, shelter of some sort. And until those needs are met, people are not able to start to address second order needs. The primary one is security. So we definitely have a point of view that seeding grassroots economic activity is a critical step to peace in conflict zones. And that's one of the learnings that we've acquired on this journey. But there's one of our villages, and you can see houses are in various sort of development. But we also have hundreds of families living in the caves. This happens to be in Bamiyan, where the big Buddhas were blown up. So now, these are largely women and children, often widows, who are really the bottom of the barrel. And that's where they live in the winter months. So we wanted to start thinking about how to address housing. And so we don't invent anything. We trawl around on the internet and come up with low-tech solutions, which we then test. So this is one of our coolest things. We just did it this summer. It's called Super Adobe. And it's basically, and this is a male work crew because they are out. They're out in public. Everything else we do is in the context of a walled compound where women can go in and not be seen. This is our first male work crew, but we trained them in this technique that a NASA scientist invented, and it basically makes housing out of dirt, plastic bags, barbed wire, and a little stucco kind of substance that's got a fixin' in it. And so this is, we built two different structural models, the Cloverleaf four-room house, and this is a widow who had a piece of land but no house. And that is our little, it's not painted yet and the windows aren't caulked, but this is our little four-room Cloverleaf house. Now the benefit of this house is that, and there's our happy widow inside her new home, and we wired it because at some point we may add a solar panel, but not right off the bat. Now the benefits of this housing is, and those are her children, is that it's like old-fashioned adobe. It retains heat in the winter, warmth in the summer. I'm sorry, other way around. Heat, it's warm in the winter and cool in the summer. It is impervious, so it doesn't get washed away if the snow melt comes, as just mud brick houses do. It withstands earthquakes to California seismic standards, and it's bulletproof, which is a nice feature in Afghanistan. And then our second model was the large vaulted one-room model. And you can see here they're stuccoing the outside, and there's the inside. So we're still waiting for the windows to be installed, but there was our building. So then we thought, wow, we've got this great building. So these are preschoolers, and generally once children are able to walk, they pretty much are just left on their own because the mothers are engaged in work. And so sort of the 2 to 6-year-olds, until they're old enough to go to school, just kind of wander around and often get in dangerous situations or are injured. So we opened a preschool in our model home, and that's our woman country director. And we have the first preschool in Bamiyan province, and probably, again, hard to say, but I would venture to say one of the first in Afghanistan. And there's our first class of preschoolers, which we clothed and provide 2 meals a day and a nap. And so here's an example of starting in one place, pulling that thread. We use a lot of yarn analogies, pulling that thread and seeing it lead you into a different direction you might not have anticipated. Now, this walled area is another one of our major initiatives. It is actually our garden center, but we built a playground, which is great fun to see the children enjoy. Now that is our garden center. You can tell by the lush greenery that this area is conducive to farming. It's not. This is a non-agricultural area because water is an extremely scarce resource. So what those plots are is we experimented training, we had a master gardener training women to grow nutritious vegetables, which we then trawled around and found from the University of New Mexico a dehydrator that doesn't require electricity. And we dehydrated in our test pilot about 600 pounds of vegetables, which we then package and redistribute in the winter months when there's virtually nothing nutritious. I mean, they're really eating dried lentils. Now, this is a example of a source for both drinking water and laundry. And so, any guesses what these are? I thought they looked like beehives myself. These are biosand water filters, which we trained women to make. This is again in our garden center where we have our manufacturing operations. There's 3 of them. Now these cost $17 a piece to make, all in, and that is out of the reach of any local families, so we decided to distribute them to public venues, schools, mosques. In this case, it's the orphanage, and what we have there is the before and after. You dump in the bucket of dirty water, and that's what you get. And these things take out 99% of the pathogens from the dirty bucket of water. Now, this was what was the motivation for our second most ambitious project, which is our Women's Community Center. Every day, our country director said in the winter, she would observe women going out and washing their hands and their clothes and their dishes on ice, which is really brutal to watch. So that little gem in the background is our community center in a different village called Dragon Valley. And it started with the idea of a laundromat so that we could have heated water. And these women come in And we get about 300 women a day coming to our center for some purpose. But we also have 2 stall showers. Now, the water is in what they call sun boilers. All that means is there's tanks on the roof that get warmed by the sun, and it's gravity fed. So they have warm water, place to hang them. But we also then thought, well, wait a second. Now that we have an enclosed, walled place where women could come, and again, our deals with the family is you have to release them to us because women aren't typically let out of their compounds, their familial compounds, but you have to let them out. So once we have water and women in one place, well, we could have a tea room. So women now, the dynamic is that women are now able to socialize and to have friends for the first time in their lives. We also have our classrooms here, and that's a woman doing a math problem. And we also put in a 2-story loom room. And the reason that's important is our production was constrained in terms of the size of the rugs by the size of their homes and how tall a loom they could accommodate. Well, once we started winning awards, we then set our eyes on the commercial market. And this is where I put a plug in for everybody who has a chic, cool-looking company that's socially responsible. Guess what? They should have Arzu rugs either on the wall or on the floor in the public-facing spaces. So we also do a series of small programs. That's me at the end of the row there. This is a baking program, and the women made their outfits. They're supposed to be like chef's hat, but they kind of look like shower caps. But what are we making? We are the Cinnabon of Afghanistan, because what are we training them to make? Okay, they can't afford this, but all those expats at UNAMA and the military and people that kind of come through buy our buns. And then this is, the governor of the province of Bamiyan is the only woman governor in Afghanistan. And I met her on my very first trip to Afghanistan in January of '03, and when she was the women's minister. So we've worked very collaboratively, and she's given us lots of land, which is, you have to get it from the government. So this is the next site where we hope to develop another community center. And then this is her idea. These are new government buildings, and she wants us to make basically Central Park, another lush green area. But we, believe it or not, the Japanese government is, we're just waiting to get final approval. We think they're going to fund both of these projects. Now, what have we learned from all of this? Well, what we've learned about how to innovate and execute competently in very severe conditions in the middle of nowhere in conflict zones. So about 2 years ago, the Kauffman Foundation president coined a phrase called expeditionary economics. And what that means is that in conflict zones where the only feet on the ground are military, the normal aid organizations cannot operate because of the lack of security. And in Afghanistan, largely they're all locked down because they can't, they're run by expats and they can't go outside the green zone without armed guards. Well, that decision we made early on to hire only local people from the local community has made us part of the fabric of these villages. So we have access, that last mile of delivery into the homes, which is where we have learned how to do this. And believe it or not, and this is another part of this long, strange journey, it caught the eye of the US military as it started to consider its doctrine of expeditionary economics. How does the military train itself to work at the grassroots to seed some economic development, basic, so that people can get to that, start thinking about that second order of need, security. So where did that lead me? I went out to Camp Pendleton at the invitation of the commanding general of the Marines as the surge was deploying. And they called and said, would you come? And I said, well, of course I'll come. So I went and met with the senior officer staff to talk about how we do what we do. And at the end, I met with General Mills, great name for a general, and he said, Mrs. Duckworth, thank you so much for coming. We're going to go in and clear the area. This is HELMAND province, where the surge, that's the home of 99% of the world's opium and heroin and the Taliban. He said, we're going to go in and clear the area, and we want you right behind us to give us some more advice on the ground. And I'm like, yes, sir, General, thinking I'm never going to hear from this man again. Well, this was last summer. That was March when they deployed. So about Memorial Day, I get an incoming call saying, the general's ready for you to come to HELMAND province. Now, this is my 4th trip to Afghanistan, but even I was a little bit taken aback by this one. So I flew commercial to Kuwait and then got on a military transport at Camp Ali al-Salim and flew into Camp Leatherneck, HELMAND province. There's the VIP quarters, and there's me. I am wearing 35 pounds of body armor and a 10-pound helmet, getting ready to get into a vertical takeoff Marine Osprey plane, and I was in physical therapy for the rest of the summer, heaving that body armor over my head. But I will say that every day we'd go out to the tarmac. I was embedded with the Marines for about a week. We'd get in some kind of a cool helicopter or armored vehicle, and we'd go somewhere and meet local people. So that's my knee, that pink thing there. And I am afraid of heights. And one of the things you realize in Afghanistan is that anything you fly in has open sides and open back and guys with machine guns hanging out. And those fields that look so nicely cultivated are poppy fields. So this is us with the Danes going out of the green zone by land. And I have to say that this leads to the second export product, which is this little product, the opposite of our rugs. The general challenged me to come up with something that unskilled women could do. And I went out and met with different people, and I was really not finding anything until I went to the Danes. And these guys look like Viking gods. They are really jacked, and they are really good looking and tan. Long hair, and they're a little looser on the uniform. So one of the guys that was showing us around had something like this on. So I immediately, of course, said, can I have it? And he said, are you kidding? It's my lucky charm. I never take it off. But somebody else gave me theirs. So I went back and said, I think we found a product. But this is us literally going outside the wire. Think like Hurt Locker. That's what that's like. But I had the opportunity to bring some of the Marines up to show them what we did in Bamiyan. And it really was a wonderful experience. So here's our product, Peace Cord, made out of 550 parachute cord, authentic military materials. And these, that first one's the Marine button. But the idea is that if you empower women and try to solve those first order needs, and the Marines introduced me to an entrepreneur down in LA who used some of his income and earnings to found an organization that funds the humanitarian work of troops on the ground. So I called him up and said, how about, you know, we direct some of the money your way. And so, so we think if you empower women and really help people try to develop their own lives, it'll ultimately lead to peace. So that's Women Making, and this is 150 new jobs in our Women's Center. So impact, what does this all add up to? We see it because we know the stories of these women and their families. We know who lost a husband to the Taliban. We know whose daughter froze to death during the winter. We know who's had just tragedy after tragedy because we know their stories, but we also track them every year because we're in the houses doing something every week. And this is what we see. We see children that have chubby cheeks and women whose skin is not gray and who can read and write. And this is taken from the vantage point of our office in Bamiyan. And I really do believe that in order for peace to occur, it has to start with economic activity And if I were placing my bets, I would place them on women, because women do the work of the world. And so that is what I am doing now. And I will tell you, it has been, I have learned so many things. I'm going to open up to questions then. I've learned so many things that I never thought I would do or learn. It's a challenge every day. And honestly, this is probably the most interesting work I've ever done. And our goal for the whole thing is to prove out a new economic model for post-conflict reconstruction, which is you can do all the holistic MDG kind of work, but when the funding stops, as it always will, in a traditional philanthropy or charity model, the programs stop. So our goal is to cash flow this thing, which we're not cash flow positive yet, although Peace Corps, believe it or not, and this is only a year old, which in Afghan terms is like the speed of light. We're just getting ready to cash flow this, but we still need to accelerate sales and spread the word on rugs, because when this thing cash flows, it will self-fund, and there are, for all practical purposes, endless things you can do on the ground. So that's the story, and I'll end with a quote that is very inspirational to me by Eleanor Roosevelt. And she said, "It's not enough to want peace, you have to believe in it. And it's not enough to believe in peace, you have to work at it." There's lots of work in the world to do, and I am highly confident that the people in this room are, with your talents and skills and business experience, that's exactly what the world's most intractable problems need, is business experience, execution capability, innovation, and just being able to think on your feet, which all of you can. So anyway, I'm going to stop there and throw it open to questions. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. What challenges did you face as an American coming in and proposing this? And do you think the fact that the military is so active in Afghanistan made your life easier or harder? I don't know if you're familiar with the book 3 Cups of Tea.
Oh, yeah.
But in terms of being rejected by a society that's very different from ours.
Well, I'd say the biggest challenge I had initially was bringing a Western perspective to the problem. And I think an example of that was when we first started to branch out into the villages in the north, we knew we needed to have a man and a woman, so we hired a man and we hired a woman. And at that time, there wasn't even cell phone telephony there, so someone would have to get in a car and drive a couple of hours to Save the Children was kind enough to let us use their, internet once a week. But, we'd get these reports, and we'd look at them, and they didn't look anything the same. And it's like, what are they doing? It's like they're not talking to each other. Well, guess what? They weren't, because they weren't related, and they couldn't meet in a public place to speak. So we solved that problem by hiring the woman's nephew, who actually now has worked his way up to be the regional manager of that area. And so I think, again, what we learned very quickly is you just have to leave your assumptions at the door and think of everything, listen for the market feedback, and don't assume anything. And that was probably the biggest challenge we faced early on, and I think it's the biggest challenge that international development faces globally. What else? Yes?
Hi, thanks again. This is very inspirational. I have a couple questions.
Mm.
So one is, you've said that there are endless possibilities on the ground. How are you funding the school and the preschool and so forth? Because as you say, at some point the funding stops, and then what happens next? And I've done a lot of work in Africa actually on some similar stuff, and it's disappointing. And bringing up 3 Cups of Tea, actually, it's quite disappointing now, the story coming out with what's happened there and so forth. So I've, in my experience living in Africa and doing this type of work. If anything, I sort of look back and think if we were to take the aid away from the last 40 years, the billions of dollars that we've pumped into it, their GDP per capita is would probably be higher than it is today, which is actually lower than it is than since their independence, after billions of dollars of aid. So I've sort of turned the corner and have almost given up. So it's inspirational to hear that there's still stuff that always goes on that hopefully sort of gets us to a different point. But have you come across that where it sort of feels like no matter what I do, the problem is so overwhelming, and it's always about teaching them how to fish, not giving the fish, but it's still, to me, you know, I've seen all these issues that you've talked about, and it's really, really difficult, I think, to get over them.
Well, you've embedded a number of questions, so let me make a couple of points because you're absolutely right on. First of all, do I get disappointed? And overwhelmed. I actually have, what I learned from having kids and working at Goldman Sachs is I really learned to compartmentalize. And for instance, when I was at work, I knew that everybody who needed to contact me had my phone number. And so if there were a problem at home, somebody would call and tell me that. So I didn't spend any time during the day worrying that there was a problem at home, unless somebody called and told me that there was. And so that was it was actually kind of a skill that I learned over time. So I kind of do the same thing here. I don't think about global poverty. I think about the next inch and how we're going to, you know, wire money into the country. How are we going to, you know, test this building? Oh, wow, we've got a preschool opportunity now. Because if you force yourself to think in very bite-sized increments, then when you allow yourself to pull back, you actually go, wow, you know, we've actually made some real impact, okay? I think the problem is that these problems are all so big and so multifaceted that if you try to think of them from the top down in totality, they are incomprehensible. My mind cannot grasp the scope of the issues. So what happens, you just sort of numb, you know, your eyes roll back in your head and you think, oh, I can't do anything. Well, the reality is you can do something. You know, every single person in this room is capable of doing one thing, big or small. And if everybody just did one thing, whatever they were capable of, you'd have this like tsunami of change and innovation. And that's what it's about. I completely agree with your point about international aid, and that's why I say I didn't know anything about it, so I didn't know any better. I didn't know you weren't supposed to use local people. I didn't know you weren't supposed to like hook rights with responsibilities. And you know, we also, the beauty of having illiterate men is we can always add new things to the deal, like, oh yeah, it's, you know, it's in the contract that that we put in a little, we call it our health care program. What it really is logistics. It's like a glorified chauffeur and chaperone service, because the maternal death rate is the biggest health issue in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has the second highest maternal death rate in the world. And so the average woman has 8 children, and 1 in 11 women die in childbirth. And so it's a huge life-threatening issue. So what we said is to the families is, when we had a little more means, and I'll get to the funding in a second, we had a little more means, we went and said, you know, you need to release your women to our health chaperone, our health worker. So we physically pick them up in a 4-wheel drive vehicle and take pregnant women and to whatever the clinic or hospital is. And if it's a couple of kilometers away or if it's an hour away, it doesn't matter. It's might as well be on the moon, because they won't go, or they won't be released to go. So, and we take the babies and we track it all, okay? Well, since we've started this about 5 years ago, we have not lost a single mother or child in childbirth in the country, where 1 out of 11 women die every time they have a child. So it's a very simple solution, but you just have to start. Funding. I think about this very much like any kind of a startup. So the first couple years I was the family and friends money myself, and then we started to look for sort of first round. Okay, well there is no private capital in Afghanistan. It's all government money or coalition money. Most of it's U.S. government money. And so I started to run the gauntlet of getting funding from USAID, which is the Agency for International Development, which is the bureaucratic entity in our government that dispenses the billions of dollars of foreign aid. And it is like wringing blood from a stone, and yet I watch them fund all kinds of stupid stuff that I could tell them, if they just ask, it isn't going to work, or you need to do these 3 things to make this work, but they don't ask. And so it's really been quite a shocking eye-opener to see how much money is wasted on things that never hit the ground. In Afghanistan, over the last 10 years, about 70% of the USAID dollars have never left the U.S. They get cascaded through a whole process of going to, we call them the Beltway Bandits. They're consulting firms in Washington that get the $300 million contract, take 30% off the top, then start to subcontract it out. Each cut takes 30%. And so there's very little that actually hits the ground. And that's what frustrates the Afghans, because people overpromise and then don't come through. So we have another rule. We have all these working principles. One is under-promise and over-deliver. Doesn't matter how small. So funding. Okay, we started with 0 earned income, and our goal is 100% earned income, because we don't have a fundraising person. The whole idea is that we don't want to fundraise. So I'm very stubborn about this. But the reality is we now self-fund about 50% completely. And we've had consecutive USAID 3-year contracts, which are tiny. These are rounding errors, and I think it's just because I am gum on shoe. I will not go away until they give me enough working capital to keep the doors open. But what we really need to do is to earn the rest of that income, and I think we're right at the tipping point because of where we are in this, the product cycle. But if any of you all feel like making a donation to a worthy charity who knows exactly where every penny is going, we are happy to take checks. But we really want to do it through earned income. And the day we cash flow is when we can write, a business school case can be written about this, because this model is replicable in many other places. We're doing it. Afghanistan was officially rated by Thomson Reuters as the worst place in the world to be a woman. And I think the challenges of executing there are probably make it, I'd put it up there as like the worst place to try to execute a business. Yeah. Yes?
So my question is about scale, and you were sort of alluding to it just now. So I know you mentioned, at first you had created 1,300 jobs, and that's definitely a huge impact for that particular community. But in terms of growing in the future, what are the steps that you see in terms of actually scaling up, even to, other countries?
That's a great question about scale, and it feeds right into the impact. How do you, this is all great, but who cares at the end of the day? Well, I've sort of come full circle on this. What started, again, it's been so long I can't really remember what I could have been thinking, but where we've ended up is really as a learning laboratory for innovation in grassroots economic development in difficult places. Now that applies to a lot of places, and what's so interesting to me is that's what the military saw. Because as they started to think about this doctrine of expeditionary economics, they look around and there's like sort of nothing that works in Afghanistan. Oh, Arzu kind of works. And so what was interesting to me is this past year then, as I was there last summer, this past year I was asked to participate in the working group at West Point that was determining the framework for expeditionary economics that will be then taught at the war colleges and to the military. And I was there with a bunch of people that either had like COL in front of their name or PhD after their name, because there were a lot of, UN, World Bank, think tank people, and military officers from, battalion commanders from the field. And, but we were kind of like Exhibit A. So I do think there's a lot of lessons that can be codified into protocols that we would open source. And again, I don't want to, we'll open source and talk to anybody and share any information, but I think that's where our scale will come. We're going to be the test tube. And when we figure out how to make something work, those are protocols that we can share. We will never be able to scale because we're never going to have that kind of size. But there's a lot of money going into wasted kinds of initiatives that could be better utilized. Yes?
A question for you about the local communities and how you've been received, because you're basically changing the culture in the sense that you're really giving a lot of power to these women. And I'm curious both what the men in the communities, how they've responded and how that might have changed over time. And then also what other families may think. I don't know if you have families that choose not to participate, or women choose not to participate, or whatnot, and how that affects the cultural dynamics.
The cultural dynamics are very important. And again, we I think start a step ahead because we have all local people. We don't have any expats showing up and knocking on doors. And in the early days when we were first registering families, we would have families who didn't want to do this. We also had vocal detractors who were really the rug middlemen, because the normal production process is that a woman has to buy materials from a middleman, go into debt. She then weaves, and then the middleman takes it away, finishes it, sells it in the bazaar or whatever, and then at some point in the future comes back and pays her something which, doesn't cover her labor, let alone the materials. So every one of our weavers, although highly skilled, was in debt when they started working for Arzu. And in effect, and I get a lot of, I used to get a lot of questions, not so much anymore, but is this microcredit? Well, I think microcredit is very worthwhile, in my own view, in urban areas at the upper strata of the poor. It doesn't work so well with the very basement of the bottom of the pyramid in rural areas where there's no markets. And so we've in effect taken at-risk entrepreneurs and converted them to salaried employees with benefits, is the way I think about it. And that gives them a stability in income. And we know the first year what they do is put food on the table, buy clothes. It's that first order of needs. By year 2, they start to pay off their debt. And by year 3, they start to have discretionary income that they can spend. So the husbands, the men in the household, these women know exactly how much they make, and so does everybody else in their family. The way the process works is that the men come to our office, throughout the weaving process to get the standard rate, and then we go to the home with the 50% bonus, which we have a little ceremony. We celebrate a lot of small things. We pay into the hands of the woman in front of her family. Well, there's a couple things that happen with that. Number one, she knows exactly how much her husband was collecting because she knows how to do the math, that he's gotten 2 times whatever we just gave her, okay? And we've also seen this really subtle change in the balance of power in the households, which tickles me no end. I think it's extremely subversive because they will tell us, they have more say in what goes on. They are more respected. They are treated better. We've even had weavers, again, they do the work, they do the work of the house. They raise the children, they nurse the babies, they weave the rugs. But what we start to see is husbands now say, no, honey, you stay on the loom. I'll go do X, Y, Z. Because if she's on the loom, they're bringing in money and they're supporting, 5, 10, 15 people with that income. So we see a lot of social issues that we would like to address, domestic violence being probably one of the most difficult. And we haven't figured out how to get at that issue yet, but we know economic empowerment is critical. I have a personal point of view that she who writes the check controls the agenda, and that is true in the US, it's true in Afghanistan, it's true in business, it's true in politics, it's true in academia, it's true everywhere. So that's what, again, what just I think is so great about everybody in this room, because you have the skills and the power not only to impact your life and the lives of your family and everyone around you, but there is a big ripple effect that's possible within your skill sets. Yes?
Thanks so much for sharing your story. I was just curious, given what you've experienced so far, did it change your perspective on life itself, more at a very introspective level?
That's a really good question. Has this changed my attitude or my perspective on life? It absolutely has. I do not regret a single day I spent in my career. My prior career. I loved it. It gave me the toolkit to do what I do now. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been able to do and be as effective with what I'm doing, and I wouldn't have had the means to do it. I get a lot of questions from girls, young, middle school, high school kinds of girls, who still are not necessarily directed toward business careers. You think about TV. Okay, how many shows can you have about lawyers and investigative people that dig up bodies? I mean, but what do people see about business? When I was chairman of the board of the Committee of 200, that business group I talked about 10 years ago, and one of the most interesting pieces of research we did was we commissioned Simmons School of Management in Boston to do a statistically significant survey of the attitudes toward careers of middle school and high school girls and boys, so ages 13 to 17, and they did, urban, rural, suburban, single-sex, co-ed schools, different economic brackets, and so forth. And what was so fascinating, the survey was called Teens on Business, because we were trying to figure out what are the influencers. Why is it that there's still, although the majority of people in medical school now and the majority of people in law school are women, why is it, although I will tell you, I'm very proud to report that Wharton in Philadelphia has 45% women in this year's class, which is a record not only for Wharton but for any business school, and that is phenomenal. But there were a couple of interesting top-line findings. 75% of the boys in the survey said the single most important criteria for choosing a career was money. Absolutely. 75% of the girls said to help other people and save the world. Which, by the way, is exactly what I wanted to do when I was in junior high. I was going to be a defense attorney and defend all the innocent people that are wrongly jailed, okay? Now, I didn't do that. I ended up going to Wall Street. But what am I doing now? I'm back to doing what I wanted to do when I was 13 years old. And I think there is a way that women see the world. And I think it relates also to the fact that we do have children. And I know for me personally, one of the reasons that I refused to give up on these women in Afghanistan is that, I look at the faces, now my kids are big, but when they were little, when I started doing this, I'd look at their faces and I look at the faces of these children that I would meet and these women who are living with, no heat in, sheltering in some bombed out thing, where their kids are wearing flip-flops in the winter, and I think, that could be me and my kids, and somebody's got to do something. So I think it's really been transformative for me, and I also think it's had a tremendous impact on my kids. I hate to say it, particularly the girls. But no, I think they get that the world is a bigger place, and that even though they are teenagers, they need to get outside of themselves and have a perspective about an obligation to try to work for peace and to improve things, you know, in the world, which I personally think is every single person's responsibility to do that. So yeah, it's been very impactful. Why don't I take one more question, because I know we're running way late, and you've been so great, I don't want to keep you. Yes, ma'am.
You've said, and clearly there's a ton of need and a ton of opportunity and ways to help. And I mean, we want to help my friends, and all colleagues want to help. But speaking to you as a young professional woman, I'm in my mid-20s. I don't have access to a lot of financial resources. I don't have my own that much money to give.
Yeah.
I don't have a wide network of business contacts. I don't even have years of financial experience. How can we help?
Well, there are a lot of ways that you can help. And what I've seen in my own career, in my own life, there are times when you have time and no money. And there are times when you have money and no time. There are times when you have neither, and there are times when you have both. And so, depending on where you are in that natural cycle of life, kind of dictates how you help, okay? But I'll just give you some examples. You know, if you want to be a supporter of some charity in a small way, write a check. It doesn't have to be a lot, it could be $100. Give it to us, we'd love it. But what's really interesting about you guys is you have this tremendous knowledge base that I do not have, and that I know our organization doesn't have, which is about social media. And how do you think about creating movements and creating impact through you know, social networks. That's a tremendous power. And you know, you look at the Arab Spring, and that was largely driven by social networks. So I would say Arzu has largely been built by people who have particular skills who have volunteered to do things. And so, for instance, we have free legal services, free accounting services, free office space, free office furniture, and that's partly because, again, I do have the network that you build over a career, and I'm not shy about picking up the phone and calling somebody and saying, do you have any like free office furniture you can give us? And they usually do. But that's what's so great about having tenure in a career, and that's what you should be doing, is building that Rolodex, because not only are you building skills, but you're building a network, like the network of people in this room, or the network of people in your Wharton cohort, or the network of people that you work with. Because believe it or not, the world becomes an increasingly small place. It has something to do with age. And one of the tips I've said to my kids is always treat everybody you work with and meet with respect and as much professionalism as possible, because I guarantee you they will roll back into your life at very strange times. And I've experienced this and learned that lesson the hard way, by the way. But you start to, you know, as you build this bank of goodwill over the course of a career, you can tap into it. So keep building that base, and again, you know, just do something. You know, use the skills that you have that are unique. Any organization would be thrilled to have insights about that are unique to you. And again, for years, I didn't have any time. I didn't have any time. And so I would write checks to causes that were meaningful to me, small at the beginning and then increasingly larger. Well, now I'm in that enviable position because of what I've done in the past, that I have the both. And so now I can really, you know, pull out the stops.
Thank you.
And again, we are thrilled to have whatever volunteers might want to come forth. We will put you to work in some way. So,
well, we'd like to thank Connie this evening for the time.
Thank you, Bernie.
It's a little gift from us to
thank
you.
you.
And we're going to ask everyone to stay for a couple of minutes. Connie's going to go back upstairs and sign some books for us, and we're going to have a raffle, so I just need your attention for a couple minutes. But we really do appreciate you coming out, joining us. Connie was in Seattle for some other meetings and came down to join us. Your perspective on this, it's inspirational. what you've done in your life, how you've used your time, your talents. It's really important for all of us to see that and to encourage all of us to use our time and talent in the same way. So thank you.
Thank
it's really
you.
appreciated.
Oh, and don't forget to tell them about Peace Corps.